How's everyone doing tonight? I grew up in church, so like y'all probably get some like audience participation, some like, let me get an amen. So I think the way I'll start is I'll do a 5-minute just little short spiel on why you should do your own startup at some point. And then we'll open up for you to ask me anything, and then eventually for y'all to ask me whatever you want to ask me, because I think it's a much better way to do these kind of things. So a bit about me, I'm Nigerian, grew up in Nigeria, came to the US, and why I think you should start a startup, right, is because I think a lot of you are smart, driven, highly motivated, and who wants to like have a very nice car at some point, like in your 30s? Okay. So like you're gonna work really hard, right? Like that's a choice you've made in your life at this point. You're at Berkeley. You're gonna go somewhere and work for someone else. It's gonna be really, really hard, and you'll do that thing. For me, I think starting a startup is all about like, do you want ownership, right? Do you want to own something and feel like every day you come into it and you work hard and it's yours, like you're a baby? And second, like, do you want to make outsized returns, right? And that could be, you get promoted at your next job after your startup. It could be you sell your startup. It could be your startup becomes Facebook, right? Whatever the outcome is. The best way I've found in my career to kind of step above, right, to do more is to own your own thing, right? Because then you get to answer the question for yourself, like, am I going to wake up at 6 a.m.? Am I going to make that extra call? Am I going to take that extra, Zoom meeting, right, to figure out if I can close this client? And those things are hard to do, right? They're really hard to do when you're doing it for someone else. But when you do it for yourself, there's an entirely different way of thinking that you can unlock, right? Now, is it a startup? Is it a nonprofit? It doesn't really matter, right? I think just owning your own thing, your own small business, your own, charity, is all about ownership for me, right? And I think we'll talk more about this as the night unfolds. But when you think about startups, I would say don't think about getting rich. Don't think about being the next Zuckerberg, although one could argue no one wants to be the next Zuckerberg right now, right? But for me, it's really about how do I own something? How do I put all of myself into it? And that's why I started my startup, and we'll talk more about that. But that's why I think all of you in this room is clearly overachievers listening to some random Nigerian dude at like 6:30. Like that to me is how you go all in, right? If you're playing poker, you put all your chips in, and for me, a startup is really that moment where you say, like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna own it, I'm gonna make it happen. So with that, I'll kind of let you open up, because I know you've got a bunch of questions that you've lined up.
Yeah, sure. So first question is, you immigrated from Nigeria with your mother and 2 siblings at a younger age. Can you tell us how that influenced your perspective on what it means to succeed in the United States?
Good question. If I recall correctly, your parents are also immigrants, right? Is this true? Yeah, so like I think a lot about immigration, right? Because I think for me, that's something that happened to me when I was 11. It was like my mom was like, "You're getting on a plane. We're going to America." I'm like, "What is America?" Right? And so you get here, you got to learn the language, you got to learn how to talk like an American, you got to watch all the TV shows. But for me, I think when I started doing companies and started like working at startups, that really gave me a kind of a leg up on people, because I didn't really feel entitled to anything. I knew what it was like to live on Section 8, to not have a visa. I knew what it was like to like struggle. So for me, it was like, well, if I got to stay up until 2 a.m. and write some code, that doesn't actually seem that hard. And I always think about, my mother and like her experiences as a single mom raising like immigrant kids. And so for me, I think that gives me a leg up in certain situations, because I don't really feel self-pity or any of that kind of, I think just self kind of, millennial crap, right? Where you're like, I feel better than I am, or any of that. I just feel like I gotta honor the fact that she did what she did to get us to this country. And so that some level is why, we work so hard at doing startup stuff, right? It's because not everyone in the world gets this opportunity, both in Nigeria, but also in parts of Asia. But for me, Africa is a place where you can't really do startups at the same level. So to be here, knowing that someone had to sacrifice me to be here, I think is the ultimate, motivator. So I came here from middle school, right? Like that's when we got here, like 8th grade. And so for me, I think 8th grade, 9th grade was really about like figuring out how to be American. So I wasn't really thinking about, going to tech or any of that stuff. I was just thinking about like, how do I how do I go through the American education system and get to college here and be, fit in with like the rest of the kids in my school. But I think once I started, high school, I started programming a lot. It was kind of clear to me that programming was something that I was much better at than, let's say, I wasn't that good at basketball. I wasn't that good at any other sports, right? So it was like, well, I'm really good at programming, so let me just keep doing the programming thing. But I would say, like, for me, tech wasn't something that was clear as a career path, right? All my people were like, lawyers and those kinds of things, medical, like that's why I asked that question, right? Because I think a lot of you are studying computer science or studying something in the data science field. But for me in high school, that wasn't really a path. It was kind of like, you can go be a lawyer, you can go be a doctor, you can, do some blue collar jobs. But when I got to college, after high school, I found out that really being good at programming, which to me was just a thing to do on the weekends, was something that you could make a career out of. Initially, I wanted to make video games, but apparently that shit is hard. Am I allowed to, okay, yeah, that shit is really hard. I was not ready to make video games, and so I decided, I'm gonna go just learn how to make computer software, and that's gonna be my career path. I think for me, going through high school here was really helpful because I think you get exposed to a lot of, technology. You get to touch stuff and play with stuff, and so getting to college was much easier than if I had, let's say, come from Nigeria to college here. That would have been a little more difficult, Next semester, I did research all through college, right? I thought, I'm not going to do game design and game development. Maybe I'll do some Google kind of stuff. To me, it was always unclear if I wanted to actually work as a software engineer because I didn't know any software engineers. The people I knew were professors, doctors, lawyers in my family, and so I spent, I think, the first 4 years in college. I took 6 years to graduate. Anybody on the fifth year? Anybody on the fifth year? No. All right. See, y'all are overachievers. It took me 6 years because I couldn't figure out did I want to go do university research, and so I spent about 4 years researching every summer. Going to work at different artificial intelligence labs around the country, and that taught me a lot, right? I got to really go deep on computer science theory, artificial intelligence work, but it became clear to me my 4th year of school, I don't really like doing research, right? I'm good at it, I can write papers, I can get on stage and talk to people about stuff, but it doesn't give me the same excitement as building something and seeing it run and being okay, I deployed it, okay, cool. How do I build something else? And so my 4th year, I made a pivot from computer science research completely back to actual computer development, building small programs, and that was a hard transition, right? Because I think for me, writing papers and reading papers was my life for 4 years, and then kind of saying to my professors nah, I'm not going to go to PhD, I'm not taking the GRE. That was a big shift. But I think in hindsight, that kind of deep computer science work enabled me to be a little better when I did get back to just writing software programs and doing the Google thing. So yeah, that was my path. It was kind of a little bit scattershot, a little bit of, I did a 2-year stint in the English department, taking philosophy classes and poetry classes. So I definitely explored in college a lot more than people probably should or would. But I think for me, at the end of it, I was able to say, okay, I had a true college experience. I tried a bunch of things. I experimented a bunch. And now I know, right, with certainty that this is probably what I want to do for the rest of my life. And for me, that was build software companies, work at software companies, sell software. All the things that go into software for me are the thing that I want to do. And stuff like research, I'll read a paper here and there, but I don't really, in retrospect, enjoy research as much. So yeah. I immediately went from school. I think my first semester after college, I felt behind, right? All my friends had went to Google for a summer, went to Facebook for a summer, and I was I don't feel like I'm as good at programming as someone else. So let me go work for a summer right after college before I go look for my first job. So I came out here for a bit. I was in the Bay Area, just kind of hanging out, meeting friends, seeing what they were doing for their internships. And I landed an internship back in Atlanta where I went to school. So I flew back, did that internship. And that was interesting. I think it definitely taught me a lot, because I was working, ironically, for another startup, and they were definitely still in the idea stage, because it was two guys in their boxer shorts many times when I would come in, and they would just work out their living room, and they gave me an internship, paid me a couple grand, and I was like, cool, I'll write code for you. And so that taught me a lot about kind of the true startup lifestyle, like when things are not clear, when there's no money in the bank, right? Before you've raised a seed around and you can hire people, it's like, cool, like here's some code, go write it. I think from that experience, though, I learned that I definitely wanted to work in industry. I definitely wanted to be a software engineer, and I wanted to do that for a long time. But I was also clear that I didn't want to work at a startup that small, right? It was two people in their bedroom, right? It was like not really for me. And so after that, I got a job at a company that's now public, but at the time was like a 200-person, 300-person startup in Atlanta, and they were doing fintech stuff. And so for me, that was right up my alley. And so I went there for a year, worked as a software engineer, just wrote code, didn't really speak to anyone. No one knew I could speak probably. I just, heads down every day, write a bunch of code, go home. And after that, I think I was able to understand, okay, well, I don't want to be at a startup that's super small and like still trying to figure out how they're going to make money and that stuff. I don't want to be at a startup that's, in this case, about to go public. And like by the time I left, there were like 1,000 people there. It felt big. And so after that, I went to another startup that was pretty small. I think it was like 10 people when I got there, but a world-class team. They were backed by Andreessen Horowitz, which is a firm out here. So it was definitely a different experience than like that bedroom startup that I worked at. And from there, I really got to, I met a bunch of people, like my mentor, Josh, who now works for me, ironically, in a ton of events. But I got to meet people who were in their 40s and had been writing software for 10, 20 years. And those folks at that job really helped me figure out, okay, like, do you want to be front end? Do you want to be back end? Because at the time I was pretty good at, I could do Photoshop stuff. I could write some C. I was like, I can do anything. But they really helped me figure out, like, where do you want to be in the technology sector? Do you want to be on the back end, the front end? Do you want to specialize in these languages? And at that job, I chose to specialize. But I also, in the back of my mind, kept thinking, and I would say I'd had this thought of like, I'm going to do my own thing at some point, but it was at that job that I was like, okay, interesting. Like I'm owning all of this stuff, right? Like, because it's so small that people are like, just take it, you go do it. And at some point I look back and I was like, oh, I'm doing a lot of stuff that I shouldn't be doing, right? I'm at the time like 24, 23, yeah, I was like 24. It was like, I shouldn't be responsible for this, right? Just context on what we did. We made smart Wi-Fi routers that would sit in your house and you could control it from your phone. And I remember one time, I had written this system that would, in the middle of the night, update people's routers in their homes, right? So 60,000 routers around the US somewhere would get updated by some code I wrote. And I broke a lot of routers, right? Like I shipped a couple bugs, and my boss would come in the morning and he'd be like, cool, like we'll send them a new one. What are you shipping next? I was like, oh, okay, like cool. You're okay with that? I'm gonna go ship some more stuff and break some more routers. And owning that, right? Like being able to say like, okay, that's my system, I built it, I broke stuff and then I fixed it and I worked with support. Like that interaction to me was, it was better than I expected it to be. And so I decided at that point, okay, if I can own this and I can, be a good steward of it, what else can I own? How many more systems can I own? I mean, how many more, types of systems can I try to build? And so for me, like that job was really what got me to love industry. But before then, I was really just trying to work my way up, get to the point where I was making like good enough money to buy a house and that kind of stuff. But that job taught me like, well, you can own stuff, and if you can own stuff at this level, maybe you can, run the whole show. After that, I went to MailChimp, which is kind of a cliche at this point, like kind of not really a startup anymore. And so there, I got a bit more of the management training that I needed, a lot of conference speaking, a lot of, just managery stuff. And then after that, I went to BlackRock, which is, there I was like a vice president, so like I didn't even write code anymore. And so that taught me I didn't want to be, a 40-year-old guy like running a team and like, dealing. I was like, that's not for me. Like I don't want to climb the ladder anymore. I'm good where I'm at. I'm gonna hop off the ship and go run my own show. So then went off and raised money, and the rest is history, right? Yeah. So that's my journey. Is I think a lot of trying to figure out what I was gonna do post college, and then once I got out of college, it was a lot of figuring out like what kind of life do I want, right? Do I want to like own a Mercedes or Tesla, whatever people drive right nowadays, and like have 2.5 kids and like kind of hate your job because like you manage a little widget thing that does widget things, and I was like, nah, that's not me. And a lot of those guys are my mentors, right? Like just to be transparent with y'all, like I met those guys and they taught me like, okay, this is how you become a great software engineering manager at Google. And I was like, I don't want to be a software engineering manager at Google. Like that sounds like a horrible life. But that was for me, right? I think in retrospect, what I'd say for people like y'all, like thinking about your careers, like talk to people who are actually working, right, in those careers and be like, do you like your life? Like, do you wake up in the morning at 9 a.m. be like, I want to go to work? And that may be the nature of the work you do. It may be your personal crap you got to deal with. But for me, I knew at that point, okay, if I'm climbing the rank and I'm making like stupid money working as a manager of a widget division at this company, I'm not going to be happy. So I got to figure something out. And it wasn't leave tech, which a lot of my friends did. I was like, I'm going to leave. I'm going to stay in tech, but find a different path. And for me, that was startups. Yeah, so a bit about backstory. So I worked at MailChimp for 2 years, and who knows what MailChimp is? Anyone? Okay, cool. MailChimp is, this is me 3 years ago doing recruiting. MailChimp is the world's largest email marketing platform for small businesses. If you need to run Facebook, so that's what the MailChimp marketing people will have me tell you. But MailChimp to me was like the best place to work because as an engineer, I ran 2 teams and I kind of had exposure to stuff that most engineers never got exposed to, right? So I got to see, products when they were just an idea, right, in the CEO's head. It was like, oh, go figure it out, go make it happen. But what I found there was that, email marketing generally was getting tough, right? Because people, especially you young people, don't open your emails. You don't read your spam. I don't know what's wrong with you, but you should help out businesses by reading spam. But that's a tough business, right? Like if you're sending email for people and people are telling you no one's opening my emails, you got to figure something out, right? And so at MailChimp, we kept thinking of ways to solve that problem. And the one that kept coming up was, people would come to us and say like, I have young people who work for me, right? Or young people who are my customers, and they keep texting, right? They don't do email, they just text. And so we sort of had an idea that, well, at some point, email is going to hit a cliff, right? And one could argue the cliff happened 5 years ago, but it's going to hit a cliff. People are going to stop opening emails, and so the return on each email a business sends is going to kind of plateau or just hit a downward curve. And so that happened. It continues to happen. It's in a decline, but it's a very slow decline, right? So you can just send more emails as opposed to sending better emails, right? That's kind of how we solve this problem. But we kept asking, well, what if you could send text messages to people? And at the time, it was sort of regulated. It was kind of hard to figure out how to do this. But around when I started Parrot, like late 2018, early 2019, a bunch of regulations had changed. Like the industry was shaping up so that we could try to do this at scale for every business in America, right? We could be very ambitious about that. And so at the time, I was still unsure. Like, do I want to go start this company? This is late 2018. I'm like, probably not. So I kept building stuff at night, with blessing from MailChimp, like you could work on your own thing at night. I kept building like a little texting app that you could use to like put in a bunch of numbers, text a bunch of people about a sale you got going on, something like that. Worked on it 2018, worked on it 2019, and by the end of 2019, I kept getting recruited away from MailChimp, right? People saying like, come do what you're doing at MailChimp for us. And one of them was a really big bank, BlackRock, and they offered me, they made me an offer I could not refuse. And so I went there for 7 months, and as I described before, I hated that shit. I was like, nah, this ain't for me. I ain't doing this. And struggle with that, right? It's like, well, like this is a lot of money, right? Like, why would you walk away from this to go do a startup? And so I did not plan to start the company during COVID. This was not the plan. I wouldn't recommend starting a company during a global pandemic. That's a strange thing to do. If my kid came to me and was like, Dad, I want to start a company during a pandemic, I'll be like, okay. Nah, don't do that. Why would you do that? Keep your job and like do it on the side. That's what I kept telling myself. But I got my bonus from BlackRock, which was stupid money, right? Like the kind of money you don't walk away from. And I was like, perfect. This is enough to survive for a year. If Parrot doesn't work, or Parrot Mob, which was the name at the time, if Parrot Mob doesn't work, I've got enough money from this bonus to just live for a year, and like I can go to Europe or some shit, or go to South America and live cheaply, right? So like, cool, let me just like hole up in my apartment for a couple months and build this thing. I think a week or two after I quit, the world shut down. I was, oh no, this was an odd choice to make at this time. Because I mean, I think everyone didn't know, right? We didn't know if COVID was gonna shut the world down. We had an inclination that things were bad, like we had some reports, but then things got really, really bad. And by that point, I was out. Like I couldn't call my boss back and be like, can I come back? That was not really for me, but it also just wasn't even possible at that point. And so that's why we started during COVID. It wasn't intentional. Now, ironically, and you gotta believe that there's something out there looking out for you. We operate in a space, right? E-commerce. We make payment software for e-commerce companies. So you can, who shops at Fashion Nova here? Damn. Is that out? Is Fashion Nova out? What's in now? What's in? What's like the hot brand? Which one? SHEIN. Yeah. Okay, I've seen that. I've seen that in reports. People tell me that's I gotta catch up. Okay. See, you can tell I'm old. Like, Fashion Nova is what I'm still on. That's 5 years ago. So at the time we quit, e-commerce was doing what it's doing, right? It was going up steadily. People were buying stuff on their computers, on their phones, and then COVID happened, and it was like, oh no, like that in-person shit is gone. You can only buy online. So the e-commerce category did not this, which is normal linear growth, but one of these, right? And for us, like we make e-commerce payment software, right? We let people, Shein text you and be like, do you want this blouse? Which is automated by some machine learning system we build for them. And then you can respond and be like, yes. And then we'll take your credit card over text, right? Like that's what we do. So for us, it was like, oh, great. Like people are on their phones buying stuff and we make stuff to let people buy stuff on their phones. Perfect. And I couldn't have predicted that, right? Like for me, I just believed strongly that we should build a tool like this for small businesses. And ironically, every small business in America in 2020 needed our software, right? So for us, it was a really great time. We launched a horrible beta of it, got a bunch of growth, and we're like, holy crap, we gotta put pauses on it. We then paused, raised a bunch of money, grew the team, and then went back to building, and now we're launching next Wednesday, actually, the first like public version of Parrot. So yeah, it was not intentional to start during COVID. I would not have recommended it to someone I love, but it really worked out for us, and so far it continues to be like a huge source of growth for us. Just that the world continues to be, as we can see in the room, masked up with lots of social distancing. So for us, it's really just about like doubling down on the vision of like the internet, people's phones, e-commerce, so on and so forth. Yeah, good question. I mean, I think for me, it's funny because I applied to YC with a co-founder for a different startup like four years ago at this point, like 3.5. And at the time, I think the common wisdom, and I think this is still a common wisdom, is that you need a co-founder, otherwise like YC won't back you, or whatever nomenclature we use. And so I think there was always a push in my mind to find a co-founder. I probably, if you had said like, Osa, here is a great person that you should co-found the company with, and they're ready, and they've also got a bag on the side that they can use to fund their lifestyle while the startup figures itself out, I probably would have done it, but I couldn't find that person, right? Like I didn't really look that actively. Maybe I should have, but I just said, I know how to build a system. My brother does sales, so I know how to sell enough. I'm good at customer support because I know how to, excuse my language, shut up. Well, I didn't use see, that was good. I didn't curse, right? I'm trying to keep it clean but I know I shut the fuck up and just like listen to people. And like, that is customer support, right? Like that is literally all you do in customer support is get yelled at. And when you're building a piece of software, all you do is get yelled at because your software is always breaking, doesn't have enough features, so on and so forth. And I knew this from MailChimp, right? Because I had a bunch of good friends who were support people, and I would go watch them and just sit with them for a day, and I'd be like, okay, yeah, like that looks horrible. I would not want to do that for a living, but I can do that, right? I can be humble and like take feedback from my customers. And so for me, starting alone wasn't as scary as it would have been if I didn't work in the industry before and kind of essentially know what the thing should have been. Where things were hard as a solo founder was like, you don't have anybody to talk to, right? Like, you got a couple of buddies who also do a startup, like, but not really. You've got mentors who are like CEOs of companies, and like they're like, trust the process, and you're like, I don't know what that means, but I trust, like, I'm trying to figure this. So there's lots of advice that isn't really that helpful, but it's good, right? Because it's someone to talk to, right? Even if the person is giving you advice that you're like, it's at least someone to listen to you whine about how hard startups are. And so for me, it would have been great to have a co-founder for that reason, but of course, it would have been great to have someone write more code, because like writing more code is always better than writing less code. Like there are a bunch of stuff I would want a co-founder for, but I think for me it was always, if I'm going to ask someone to do this, right, which is really give up their salary, put their money on the line, right? Like I kind of have to get it to a certain point. And so for me, I always kept thinking, well, if I get Parrot to the next stage, right, if I raise more money, then I can always go find someone who has the founder DNA and just be like, hey, like here's a job, come work for Parrot, and like here's some equity. So that's how I thought about it. But in retrospect, maybe if I had done YC, they might have forced me to get a co-founder, and maybe that would have been a better experience somehow. But I think for me, my advice is, stay focused on what you're trying to do and try to get it done. And if you can't get it done, ask for help. And that help may be a co-founder, but it may be like a buddy who just is really good at Figma and be like, I have one of those buddies who's like, I'm really good at Figma. Like I just designed your app over because it looks horrible. And to me, like that's what you need out of a co-founder, someone to get stuff done and help you. And sometimes that may come in like friends, it may come in buddies, it may come in, contractors who do you a solid and like give you stuff for half off. So there are lots of people who I think of as being part of my team early on that weren't necessarily co-founders. And the last thing I would say about co-founders that I found ironic was when, so for context, we raised like I guess they call them pre-seed now, like a couple $100,000, right? To get Parrot kind of where it needed to be early on. And then to hire the initial team, which included David, we then raised $2 million, right? And like part of that was me learning that investors don't like people with co-founders when they're giving you more than $1 million. And I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. This is not intentional. I have no co-founders because I'm bad at convincing people to quit their jobs and put their families' lives at risk. But it turns out when like you want to write someone a check for $2 million, you want to write one person a check for $2 million, right? Because it's like you're responsible for this $2 million, Osa, right? And like that's what it is, right? It's like I know where you live, like not really, but like pretty much, right? And so to me, it was ironic to find that in the early stages in the YCs of the world, people are really interested in like you having help because they're really trying to de-risk the small check they're writing. But as a check gets bigger, there is a need to know like who is the CEO, like who is the person who we will take to court if something shitty happens, right? Like Theranos, like there isn't like Elizabeth Holmes plus, it's Elizabeth Holmes, and that's important for I think investors at the higher stages because even if you have two co-founders, one of you needs to be in the room as like the directly responsible individual. And so one thing that a woman who invested super early, Elizabeth Yen, who runs Hustle Fund, one thing she told me was you can, this is like right before we raised 2 mil, I was like, I need help, Elizabeth. Like I can't figure this shit out. Like I need help. And she was like, no, you don't. You good? Like you're fine. And I was like, I need help. And what she said was like, even if you get someone to help you before you go do your next round, that person cannot be in the room with you when you're raising money. So like, you don't need help raising money, right? Because it's only you who's going to actually go to the investor. Investors, from my experience, don't like to be on a call with like 3 co-founders or even 2 co-founders. They want to talk to one person. They want to know if you have a team of people behind you. Oh, cool, you have some co-founders. Who are they? It's like an interesting like fact in your presentation, but you are the presentation, right? It's like I'm giving you 2 mil, and I think that's important to stress. Because I think for me, I was very afraid that I needed a co-founder to get the money, and then I got the money, and people were like, "Oh, we gave you the money because it's you and you alone. Like we don't like dealing with multiple people because there's always the risk, right? That one co-founder gets mad, and like I didn't think about those risks because again, I was just trying to get it started. But that is a thing people worry about. And so if you have no co-founder, do not, and I stress this because I almost did it twice. Do not pick a co-founder because you think you won't get backed, especially if you hate the co-founder, right? Like if you don't like this dude or this gal, don't make them your co-founder because you're like, YC won't let me in if I don't have a co-founder. That's a recipe for like hell, right? Because you're gonna hate the person, they'll hate you because they know you don't like them that much, you just need them for YC. And more importantly, people who are giving you millions of dollars can easily suss that out, right? They can look at you and your co-founder talk and be like, yeah, lawyers are gonna have to figure that out. Yeah, it's gonna take like $100 grand. We're gonna buy him out. Like investors think that way because they're people, right? And I think for me, that's one thing I'll stress is just if you got a good friend and you think you guys work well together, then do it. But choose your co-founders carefully and don't be afraid to do it alone if you know you can. It's weird. I don't really. It's fun when I walked in. I was like, oh wow, I've never seen that. I go to a lot of startup events. I used to go to a lot of startup events before I started a startup. I've never like seen like a black dude as like founder of a thing that I don't know. I've never seen it, right? Which is crazy to think about because I'm a black dude. I've seen one dude, and I worked for him, a guy named Paul Judge in Atlanta, who's like he's the dude, right, in Atlanta, like. Georgia Tech, Morehouse man. And I always think about him in moments like this because when I worked for him, he was kind of the guy, right? Like all the Andreessens, the Excels were backing this guy, right? Like but one thing that he never really did, although he was a black founder, was talk a lot about like diversity. And so for that reason, I don't really talk a lot about diversity. I'm not on LinkedIn talking about like, we need more diverse founders and like, I'm diverse, so give me some money. Like, I don't really play the diversity card. Although I think people, for instance, one of our VCs is they only invest in diverse founders. Like that's their thesis: is we only invest in women and people of color. And I'm a person of color, and so they took the meeting for that reason, right? But what I found during the call was they were like, oh yeah, it's cool that you fit the demographic for people we like to invest in, but we just invest in regular startups like that. We don't really care if you're black, if your startup sucks, right? And so I learned a very hard lesson there, which is that like diversity is cool, diversity is interesting, but in the end of the day, like you kind of gotta have the goods, right? Like your startup has to make sense. You have to have revenue. You have to have traction. You have to build the product, right? And what I found a lot, which is both good and bad, is that I think a lot of the diversity narrative is really around, you don't have to do the work, right? You don't have to do as much work. But I think one thing like old like church black ladies used to tell me was like, you got to work twice as hard and you got to be twice as good. And so for me, like as a black founder, I think a lot about, how do I be better, right? In every situation. How do I be? One of my investors says, Osa, you have high integrity, which just means like I don't do shit that like is stupid, right? Like just, and it's funny because here in the Bay Area, because there's so much money in startups, I hear about stupid shit all the time. And I'm like, oh yeah, like that's what you get to do if you're, if you're white. And that's okay, right? Like, privilege is a thing, like it's cool, like enjoy it. But for me, I think a lot about diversity in terms not of like what should you give me because I'm a black dude, but I think in terms of what's my responsibility, not just to my community, but also like to my investors who are giving me money, given that I am black, right? Given that there's a bunch of stuff that comes with that. And I think secondly of like, how do I make sure I have the goods, right? Like how do I make sure my revenue is up? How do I make sure the product is amazing, right? It has to work all the time. There can't be bugs. And if there are bugs, we have to like fix them as quickly as humanly possible. Even if I have to ship the code myself tonight. Like I think a lot about that, right? Making sure that you're the best in whatever you do, because at some point someone's gonna ask the question like, cool, you're diverse, now what? And for me, like now what can't be like, but I'm black. Now what has to be like, oh, well, now like let's talk numbers. Like how much do you want to invest? Like, do you want to buy software from us? Because like our software is the shit. And I don't think that if I rested on like the laurels of the fact that being diverse is in vogue right now, I could have gotten to the point where like we had the goods. Because I'll be honest, I've met people who've told me that, in little to no words, like, you should feel entitled because like now's the time for diverse founders. And I was like, what the fuck does that mean? Like it's the time to start companies, right? Like, and companies are companies. I don't like, if the CEO's black or white or gray or green, there's still one job, which is to return like the money that people gave you to make profit. And I think for me, like that's what it means to be diverse, right? Is to recognize that like there is historical baggage, recognize that there's still continuous racial tension in this country, and that I have a responsibility to like give back and to support my community. But I also have a responsibility not to make black folk look bad, because like that's what you do when your startup doesn't go well, or you squander the opportunity, right? Is like you actually make your diversity group look bad. So for me, it's really important to just work really hard and be the best I can be, given that, right, I am diverse. It's also funny because in Nigeria, I'm not diverse. I'm just another tall dude. But here, I think there's this narrative that's interesting. As an immigrant, I find that interesting because I think first about like make mama proud. Like don't make her mad. Don't screw up the startup, right? Because she's gonna be like, well, you quit an expensive job to do this startup, so like, what's up? And then second, I think, well, like, okay, I'm also black, so like in this country, let me figure out what that means day to day.
Great. So, thank you, first of all.
And you're diverse too, sorta. In the Bay Area, not really, because in the Bay Area, you're just like an Asian dude. But like in certain places, like in Atlanta, right? Like there isn't a large Asian population, right? And one of my mentors is actually a Chinese American, right? And like he always, it's funny, in retrospect, I was like, I don't think he should have said that to me when I was working for him, because I don't think HR would have, but it was a startup, right? He was like, essentially in the same words I say, he's like, yeah, I don't give a shit if you're black, right? Like, your code has to be better. And I was like, okay, say less. I saw that, just speaking on diversity, because I feel like it's just a diverse crowd, right? Sort of, right? I don't know what diversity means anymore, right? But this seems like a diverse crowd, right? One thing that I always saw when I was in uni and then working my first jobs was like there were like female and black engineers who more often than not got coddled, right? It was like don't tell him his code isn't great because he's diverse, right? Like HR is not gonna like that. And for me, it was like, wait, you're not gonna give me feedback on my pull request because another person who was diverse complained about white men giving them feedback. And so I think to me, it's really important to think a lot about that, because I think we live in a time where as a diverse person, you can really win, right? If you just like work hard and be driven, but you can also be held back by this narrative around like, you're less than, so you should get less feedback, you should get less honesty from your boss, right? HR should protect you from shit. And I think while HR and the stuff that happens in this country around justice is really good. For me in the workplace, it was pretty hard because I had to essentially convince people, convince white men and white women who had positions of privilege that it was okay to be honest with me about my own progress, right? And if I hadn't begged for that feedback and really sought it out, I don't think I would have been here, because I still would have been, with the other black engineers who were, being led to believe that they were doing good work when, their managers talk, right? And at some point when I became a manager, I was like, oh yeah, I see what's happening. I understand the game now. So that's how I think about diversity as an employer now, right? As opposed to just as a person working a job. I mean, I think the advice might be the same to me or to y'all here. I say just go for it. I mean, that sounds like cliche, like on some like Nike shit, but like just save your money. Like I told David this when he was working with me. I was like, just save your money. Like if you know you want to do a startup, just save your money. Like if you do go to Google for a couple years, which I would go to Google for a couple years, like why not? Like it's fucking Google. Yeah, do it. Like it's free food, right? Like I love free food, so I'm going. But yeah, like I would say like you gotta kind of like if you know that you may want to do a startup, which I think everyone kind of is like, I may want to say fuck you to my boss at some point, right? Like everyone has that in the back of their mind. Maybe it's to go travel, maybe it's to write a book, maybe it's to do a nonprofit. Maybe it's to sit at home and watch Netflix for a year, like whatever you want to do. I think for me, it was always about like saving money, just putting money away. Because I think that allowed me to then do the next step, which was just go for it. And it didn't really matter what the idea was. In retrospect, I think if I had decided to do machine learning for cancer, the same would have been true. It was just have enough money to just go do it, all right? And it's going to take a year of your life to figure out what it is. You're going to have to beg for money from people, but it's really, really easy to beg for money from people when you have money. Like it's just easier. And so for me, like being able to be the first investor in Parrot allowed me to be like I'm doing Parrot. Like I don't really care what you say or you say. Like I'm doing the thing, and if it doesn't work out, I can always go back to my job, right? And so that's what I would say to everyone here is like, just do it. Because the worst that's gonna happen is like you live in the wilderness for a year and your friends miss you because you're working too much, and then you come back to Google or wherever, right? Facebook, doesn't matter what the company is. Maybe not Facebook. Maybe not Facebook. Meta, that's the new name, Meta. Yeah, just go for it. And if it doesn't work out, you can always do something else. But given the crowd, given the Berkeley overachiever stamp that I put on all y'all, you'll probably figure something out, right, in a year, right? And having that cushion helps. But when you are ready, just do it and assume that you'll probably figure something out.